folks. Welcome to the next edition of Serverless Craic. So we're going to continue our series and talk about the book, The Value Flywheel Effect. I think we're at, where are we?
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. About halfway through chapter 3. I think what,
Yeah.
page 40. How are you doing anyway? All good?
All good.
All good.
Been a good summer.
Good stuff. So we're just kind of talking through this and really just sort of rereading what we wrote 2 years ago.
Back in the day.
Who wrote that?
Right.
But yeah, no, this one we talked about the anatomy of a worldly map, which I think is it's good to go back over the basics again. But one of the things that I remember when we started doing this, the worldly map and grid. Do you remember? Because when we started mapping in work, and we got to the case where we wanted to be able to describe the map to each other. So we ended up, I can't remember whose idea it was, but we ended up putting a grid on the map. So we think of the worldly map. We had like Genesis, custom, product, and commodity, and those is kind of A, B, C, D. And then the interesting part was the horizontal, the vertical, where we put 1, 2, 3, 4. The top being one being visible, and then aware, unaware, and invisible. So something was like D4, it was an invisible commodity. So we might be chatting and saying like, oh, we did a map yesterday and something came in and we'd be like, where was it? You know, I was D4. Like, why are we doing that? Why are we building that? Instantly you'd be a question. And if it's like, oh, we're renting this thing and it's up in like A1, you're like, whoa, hang on a second. You know, we should be. So it was a way to kind of almost like orient ourselves quickly in where things were like. So I thought that was really useful, I thought at the time.
Yeah, it was a useful technique. I think it became really useful whenever we started doing more org level sort of mapping, where we're mapping where do you think these teams are? You know, how visible to the end customer are these teams? You know, are they on their B2 is their tech stack, all custom built, but they're high up the value chain, or are they low down the value chain with legacy text? You know, so it brought a lot of situational awareness to where teams are located and where their journey should be to get higher up the value chain and closer to the users, or getting off of legacy tech and evolving towards more serverless or whatever, right?
Yeah. And there was a time when, say, years ago, if somebody was doing ML, you'd want that to be up around B or A, up high, like, that's a focus. But now you might argue a few years later that maybe is over towards the C and D columns, you know what I mean? And you're building something on top of it.
Was there ever an element, Dave, when you were doing this for, like, we'd be going to say like maybe like 100 odd teams you'd be kind of mapping, and we're going to talk about mapping the stacks or the different types of maps here in a second, but even kind of just applying looking for patterns, across, say, like numerous or disparate type, entities, say as teams, or looking at their tech stacks, or looking at sort of the industry they're in, what is the typical positioning and things of those, so you can begin to see patterns or whatever at an org level or at an industry level.
Yeah, it was useful when we had a lot of maps for a lot of teams, be able to make sense of them and like lift them up a level.
So you could kind of summarize things better, right? So you'd have a percentage of the org operating at such and such, and then you'd have another percentage operating up here. Yep. So you could then kind of do, correlation, causation type conversations as well, right?
Absolutely.
And like anything in mapping, it wasn't hard and fast. Like, I mean, it wasn't like a military, operation, like, or, exact, like, it just became approximately, do you know what I mean? I mean, even on that, like, so, I mean, even when you think of how to get started mapping, there was a couple of pieces of advice in the book, which, I think are good. I mean, I always thought it was very pragmatic. Look at other maps. You know what I mean? One thing that I thought was really good is really good about the worldly mapping community. There's lots of, and even in the book as well, there's lots of maps out there, and that kind of gives you an idea. It doesn't mean you have to copy the map, but you can kind of get a sense for something and maybe get an idea of how to get started.
Yeah, and I think it's almost the fear of a blank map, a blank canvas, and where do you even start? I think just seeing something that exists previously means that remove some of that fear factor, remove some of that I'm going to look foolish if I map this wrong, type challenge that you might have in your own head. So I think looking at existing maps has always been useful for us. And like you say, there's a plethora of community maps out there. There's tons out there. There's GitHub repos for them. There's awesome Worldly maps and other sort of areas that you can sort of look up and get started. And
Yeah,
maps as well. You
that
can
there's a GitHub repo called Awesome Worldly Maps. There's a few of the guys in the community maintain it. That's brilliant. That's a really good collection.
yeah.
Awesome Worldly Maps. It's worth searching for.
I think it is the key point here is just start.
Mm.
Literally just start. Just give it a go. Good things happen.
Well, one thing, I mean, if someone's mapped out like their deployment pipeline and have a couple of things in it, like you could always copy that stack and go like, well, that's where they put it, but for us, this thing is actually over here and that thing's over there. So you start copy it in and then start moving it to by your context, you know?
Yeah, I would always go to the VS. Remember the VS Code extension, and there's a repository with it, and then you can kind of see like the different. There's different tools there for annotating on the map, and I always like looking at that in terms of like what can I leverage again, when you get a wee bit more familiar, I guess if I'm trying to articulate something on a map or whatever, it's always good to kind of go and look at those sorts of things. But yeah, 100%. Other maps are good for inspiration.
Yeah. And then I think we have in Nexus collaborate on a map, and we leveraged a lot of Ben Moser's stuff, and Worley Map and Canvas is almost a nice sort of guide for getting going, asking the right sort of questions. What's your purpose, what's your scope, what's your value chain, what are the components before you even get into the map, and those conversations are hugely valuable even before you get into the map. So it almost helps get people warmed up, right? Get them thinking about what are the components, what are the value chains, who are the users, what are their needs before you even think about drawing it on the map. So it's always a nice, almost like an icebreaker because there's a nicely articulated process that you can just follow.
Yeah. I think as well we don't mention it in the book like we've done a lot of stuff around open space collaboration. I know you're not an attendee, you're a participation.
Yep.
You're here because you actually want to be involved in this. You're not being made to do it. So try and bring some of that thinking in. It's like we're all sitting here, of our own free will working on this map. If somebody really doesn't want to be there, say that's okay. If you've somewhere more important to be, go off you go. Do you know what I mean? And no hard feelings. And then you set the right tone, like, and then finally, and this is something that really struck home to me when you started doing maps with Simon Wardley himself. If you're sitting in a group and you start to speak, he'd be like, "Hang on a second, Dave. Like, what?" He'll sit and listen to the point and put it on the map. I've never heard him say, "No, that's a really stupid idea," and move on. Do you know what I mean? He'd always take the input. And it's like every comment is a contribution.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important because sometimes the first comment might be really stupid, but it often leads to somewhere really interesting.
I think that's a good one about after you listen or people have collaborated for a while and they've added a few components or a few elements to the map. Walking the map in a narrative sense usually helps regurgitate or reword what people have been talking about for maybe 15 minutes and say, oh, so you're saying this is the user and this is their needs. Oh, and they have this thing that they depend on. Well, and that depends on this other thing. And just putting it into like a couple of sentences really helps bring it to life for people, especially if they've been arguing over, that component's not there, it's over here, or this is that you forgot about this thing, right?
Yeah. You'll find there's an ebb and flow. It's a story. So you'll almost say you're doing your deployment pipeline. You'll go deep on like scanning tools and how do we scan our repos and how do we do our lint and stuff, and you'll go down off into a rabbit hole and then you come back out and then you look at the narrative and then you go down another rabbit hole. So you keep you go deep and then you come back up again, but you're always coming back up and checking the overall story. And then you're like, oh, we forgot about this. So and eventually after several iterations, you're sort of like almost like done, as it were.
I think it's a real you get better at it. It's summarizing lots of different things in one component or one element on the map, and capturing the essence of that thing as in one word or one term that everyone sort of understands what it is, but they know there's more depth behind it.
Well, it's a human psychology thing, isn't it? Like people tend to remember stories, and if you can kind of apply like a story or understand it as a story, you're more likely to resonate with it and remember it. And then certainly even when I kind of look at maps that we've done in the past, it's really weird how your mind works. You can almost recollect it. It definitely has a lot more meaning, and you can understand and comprehend quite complex things because of the way it is mapped, right?
Yeah.
And it's way more meaning.
I was about to say that. I was about to say that there's some really strategic maps we drawn in the past, like even like 8 years ago,
Yep.
that you flick it up now within 2 seconds, you're like, you just boom, you just remember instantly.
Yep.
That really complicated problem space. Much more than looking at a slide deck or reading a document. The visual just takes you right back there, like.
100%. It's our sort of cheat code for jumping around from team to team to team, or context to context, or layer level in the org. If you have a map, you're basically loading that into your brain within seconds. It's a real cheat code.
Mark, don't be telling that's a secret. Good stuff. So then probably there's a bit through the kind of the value of a map, but there was three styles of maps that I think we often used. So maybe we can just talk through those three. Um, the first one was mapping the stack, and I think Adrian Cockcroft used to talk about this quite a lot. He used to always do this, and you're pretty much taking like an architecture or a stack and kind of mapping out where things are. I mean, the famous one is you might take out like a J2 application and stick on the different components, the app server, the database. You might map a few things out
Yep.
and then sort of say, well, here, this is like a legacy system. And then you think, well, if you're going to modernize it, what would you evolve? You
Yep.
know?
I mean, that even if you talk it back to what we just talked about, and then say you're like an architect and you're leading a transformation in a large organization, you're trying to say consume a lot of information and map a lot of these kind of stacks that are all within our organization. It's such a good thing there to have. We talked about there the cheat code. If you sit down and do that with a team and kind of understand that with the squad, it just makes it easier to kind of get into those spaces and kind of really rehydrate and all that knowledge and kind of help with what you got to do at that level, right? I've certainly felt it. There's definitely has that level of use. I think the other thing there as well in the past has just been the skill sets. When you're looking at the value chain for like certain tech stacks and things like that, there's so much that comes out of it that really isn't visible in a day to day. Like if you have to train up like a whole hundreds of people on a particularly sort of gnarly skill thing because you're running on some sort of platform, and you begin to kind of get a full picture of why you should be doing certain things, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fantastic way to build situational awareness of the environment you're maybe arrived into. I know I've done this in the past where I've mapped out all the teams sort of tech stack as we go on the modernization journey, and it really does surface up. Oh, there's inertia barriers here, here, and here. There's legacy tech over here and over there. The team don't feel empowered or enabled to be able to get up the value chain, or it is a fantastic way of building that situational awareness as a leader, but it also helps the team understand the journey and understand where you're trying to evolve towards as well. So it's a great way of collaborating with the team and doing it with the team instead of, hey, we're going to modernize it and doing it through them, right?
No, and one
And
last point.
again,
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
no, go for it.
No, one last point. I mean, I know in the book we've kind of got a bias for sort of customer focus and sort of bias for value, and a lot of what you got to troubleshoot is a lot of engineering teams don't realize what they're actually focused on isn't really adding a lot of value. All right.
Yeah.
And you've really got to surface that. And I think mapping certainly the tech stack is a really good one in there, right?
It's also a great way of finding where the flow stops, right? If teams are trying to go fast, where are the blockers of fast flow? That really helps surface
Yeah.
those conversations. Like, why can't you deploy today? Why can't you deploy next week? Oh, you have a 3-month deployment cycle. Okay, let's chat about that.
And I find as well, and there's a social element because you might say, well, it's just an architecture diagram. That's all the map is, and in some ways it's similar to architectural dependencies. But the extra thing is the inertia blockers. Like you've got a rules engine, you have a rules engine in custom. You go, why is that in custom? Because there's an inertia barrier why you can't move it. You go, oh, Paddy designed that. It's really complicated. Whereas Paddy, oh, he left 2 years ago. Everybody's afraid to change it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You go, right, well, that's a problem. So that's it's not a technical problem. It's more like a gap within the team, or oh, that's on an old technology and nobody really knows it anymore. So all these kind of like, things that are there but aren't obvious from when you just hear about the tech stack.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen tons of initiatives where when we've mapped it out, the investment has been going towards the upper sort of layer of the tech stack because it's,
Oh, the UI. Yeah, yeah.
UI, but the actual inertia point are these kind of really complex subsystem squads that get no investment, but yet
Yeah.
everyone has a dependency on, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's a great point because it helps
yeah,
you make a better informed argument when you're going for investment in the foundations that everything's built upon.
yeah, exactly, dude. How do you scale this up and move those sorts of things and get investment where it needs to go, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
hundred
Very
percent.
good. So that was mapping the stack. The second part is mapping the organization. This is probably more of a thing you would do, if you're thinking about the company or whole department, where you might start looking at, different, like what are we doing within um like what are we trying to do, or what are the teams doing? What's the capabilities in the organization? A good one we've probably been across many times is like the testing. There's always a thing about testing, about should the team do the testing or the testing team do the testing. And that's always a decent map to figure out who does the verification of the software, and where would that sit and who's best to do that. Um,
This one's closely related to a lot of the DDD stuff that we've been doing recently. It's like, what are your core domains? Are your teams aligned to those core domains, or are they lined up with the value streams that are actually delivering the most value? Or do you have all your teams on things that are right supporting or shouldn't be done at all, right? So it really does bring a clarity to the shape of your org and where your teams are and what sort of users and needs are they supporting and where do you want them to be, right? Typically, you want them to be higher up the value chain, having more of an impact, you're working on more meaningful things, doing less undifferentiated heavy lifting. So it really helps you again get some situational awareness about what is the shape of your org, what is the shape of the teams in your org, what are they working towards, and are they having an impact doing what they're doing?
mm.
100%.
That's an interesting one. I mean, you could always say there's a link as well with platform engineering. It's the big trendy thing at the minute. Like you could
Yep.
definitely map out platform engineering capabilities and see where your gaps are.
I was just going to do that, like so if you do have fairly good situational awareness originating out of the tech stack type stuff, you're starting to see what is common across the various spaces. And then you can have conversations there around, well, actually, why have 15 squads all do the same sort of thing there around managing documents? We should maybe consider having some sort of platform capability. It's the same there with AppSec. It's the same there with like dev enablement. You will begin to see common traits and things that really should
Yep.
probably be productized themselves and invested in the general org level, or at least kind of pick one flavor of it. So we're all not trying to solve the same thing 15 separate times and losing kind of efficiency there, right? So yeah, 100% agree. And then you can also, I mean, this raises its head in scoring things as well. Like so you will have these things and signals that indicate, well, actually, we should be doing something here at an organizational level to kind of enable our squads and pretty much take toil away from teams, right? Again, it's all about differentiation.
Yeah.
Are our teams differentiating? If they're all building the same thing 15 different times, it's not really differentiating, right?
Exactly. And even stuff like, how can we get this team closer to the customer? How can we get them so that the work that they're doing is more visible or more impactful, or remove some of the middle people in the way of them delivering more value?
100%.
Speaking of which, so that's mapping the organization. That's almost like an internal view. The third one is mapping the market, which is like an external view. And I always think that's a really interesting one. And there's actually some great maps on that awesome Worldly Maps
Yeah.
site where people map an entire industry. I mean, and this is good for if you're joining a new company and you want to figure out like what do they actually do, kind of map out that market. It's if anything, it'll help you build understanding about the market and get you ready for your interview.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Those
good to just think about what are what's the market we are in and how is it evolving?
Yeah, I think it's like the when you think about the three different layers, it's like the team really shouldn't be solving things at a tech stack level that have been solved already for them, right? So they should be focusing on business value type stuff. At an organizational level, I mean, they shouldn't be solving things that really should be solved for at an organizational level, right? Again, they should be focused on things that are putting money in the bank and making the company successful. But then when the org level, when you do free them up from those toil or those things that are holding them back from the actual value, then you got to work out, well, where is the actual value, right? And if you're then kind of working on something that you can't compete with, something that's really moving quick across commodity, or how do you identify those higher order type things that you can capitalize upon? If you aren't kind of looking at opportunities there where you can be successful, right? You're not spending all that sort of stuff you've just freed your teams up to do very wisely, right?
Yep.
So it's really, I mean, we see it now with, like, you see it in the data side of the house now with the explosion of Gen AI, and everyone's building the same thing 14,000 different times, and you're kind of questioning where is the value, right?
Yep.
So it's really getting into those sorts of conversations, and you only get that through mapping your industry and working out who's the players, right?
Yeah. And like a lot of this means that your teams and the people within those teams are better informed to have a much more meaningful, richer conversation with leadership around what is our product direction, where are we taking the org, why aren't we going after this opportunity?
I was just going to say that's where really you get into a proper product discovery, right? It's like, where is that value, and what are we actually doing to realize it, and then that can certainly result in.
Really, what we found through all of these techniques is you start to get clarity of purpose for the squads. You start to get engaged and energized with the mission and what you're trying to achieve, because you've removed all the sort of all the layers of obscurity that sometimes exist in organizations, right? So they have a lot more clarity on, hey, if I work on this thing today, it's going to help us, realize this value, and it's going to align it to some KPI or some North Star that we have that'll help us, win within our org, and then that'll help the overall company succeed. That's very powerful, that everyone's sort of in alignment and running in the same direction.
100%. Really, what it all boils down to, right, isn't it? Is it's being able to respond to opportunity and also being able to respond to threat.
Yep.
Right.
Big time. Yeah, it's great to educate yourself on what you think those might be, and then even validate them with your whoever else in your company who knows, like, or even just have a chat about it over coffee. It's good to understand the business you're in.
It means that emerging needs become a lot more palatable to at least look at. So you go, hey, we got to go to Gen AI. If you have good maps of your tech stack, where your teams are, where the nurse is in your org, you can have a much better, more informed conversation than, oh dear, we can't even do the basics right.
It means you've thought about it. I mean, I know we've done this often. We just sit down and do the analysis and the market and say at some stage this company is going to move towards X.
Yep.
And then when it comes down the pipe, you're like, okay, there's that requirement. We were kind of waiting for that, as opposed to being kind of, completely blindsided by it.
Yep.
Cool. Well, that's the crack then. So that's kind of our chapter 3. We'll keep going next time and kind of talk through the notes of the book. Give us a like on the Serverless Age on Twitter, and have a look at the serverlessage.com on the blog. And thanks very much. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.